Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the TCLF One-on-One Series. Through the One-on-One Series, we aim to interact with the best legal professionals from India and around the world. In today's conversation, we'll be talking about a career in sports law. What are the skills required to develop a career in sports law? How do you gather those insights, and how do you develop these skills? And also, talk about some very interesting sports issues, sports law issues that are doing the rounds in today's times. And we're very honored to have a very special guest with us for today's episode, Miss Jessie Engelhart. Jessie is a multilingual sports industry professional with an experience of working with international law firms and some of the biggest organizations in the world of football as a strategy and innovation officer, such as FC Barcelona and UEFA. She advises clients on contractual disputes, and she has an experience of representing clients at Spanish courts and tribunals as well as international bodies. She has a master's degree in sports law and management from the very prestigious ISD Barcelona. Jessie, it's an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's weird hearing all of that, like someone introducing me like that. Like I don't feel like that about myself, but yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
The honor is ours, Jessie. And to kickstart this conversation, let us go back, to your old days wherein you decided to pursue a career in law. So if you could, give us some insights, what was it that inspired you to pursue a career in law at the very first place?
Yeah, of course. So basically, I have to be frank, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to study in university. There were so many options, and I'm very indecisive sometimes. So it was very difficult for me to commit to something that was basically going to determine the rest of my life, like my professional career, or that's what I thought. I now know you can like pivot along the way, but I didn't know that back then. So at some point I started doing like personality tests and trying to see like what kind of career would maybe suit my personality. I also took a gap year to kind of digest everything. And then I just started to realize that because I'm a very like analytical person, I'm a problem solver. I like to identify problems, but also at the same time solve them. I like the creativity that comes along with it. And I'm very like organized. I love order and justice as well. So I just thought, okay, let's just go ahead with law, but I didn't have any specific field of law that I was initially attracted to, like, oh, maybe people are like, oh, I want to be a criminal lawyer or a civil rights lawyer or whatever it is, and I didn't have any specific field. And so eventually, thank God, I discovered sports law. But yeah, those were kind of my first thoughts when it came to pursuing a degree in law.
Right. So from what I can gather, it was basically you thought that according to your own skill sets, law would be the most appropriate career to, apply these skills and, in order to develop them even better. So yeah, I completely get that. And then you chose to specialize in this field of sports law. So could you tell us, so this is a two-pronged question. First, what was it about sports law that attracted you the most? How did you decide that, now I want to specialize in sports law? And secondly, can you tell us the range of things that a sports lawyer has to work on in their career?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously sports law is a subject that is not usually taught in law school. Like you have like civil law, criminal law, of all these different type of law, of European and international law, but they don't teach sports law normally. So actually it wasn't until after law school that I discovered sports law as a potential career path to pursue, because basically I did some internships. I did internships abroad in Spain, international law firms. And during both internships, I got to deal with some sponsorship and some image rights contracts. And that's the first time when I was dealing with those contracts, and I was like, oh my God, like this makes law even so much more fun. Like the fact that the subject is actually a player or an athlete or a company, a sports related company, because I'm a big sports fan, love football. So when I saw that the subject made everything so much more interesting, I was like, oh my God, maybe I could actually pursue a career in this field. And it's the first time that I even thought about it, because yeah, like I said, in law school, no one really, I didn't have any teachers that were sports lawyers, or I didn't have any guest speakers come on that were sports lawyers. I didn't find webinars or podcasts like these that were teaching about the subject of sports law. That's why I'm very happy nowadays to contribute to bringing a bit more awareness and shedding some more light on this field of law. But yeah, so that's kind of how I discovered it, and why did I like it? Just basically because I got to combine my two passions, sports and law, together. And yeah, so that's kind of how I got into sports law. Then I obviously did the master's degree in sports management and law, and that's how I eventually really chose that niche and chose to specialize in that field. And what I love about it is, like I said, the fact that it's my passion, but also the fact that it's very international. And I love that, because one of my concerns in pursuing a law degree in Holland was the fact that I always knew I didn't want to live in Holland for the rest of my life. I wanted to travel and live in different places. So far, I've lived in Brazil, Switzerland, Madrid, Barcelona, Holland, obviously. And so in order to, have a career in law that is not bound to a specific jurisdiction, for me, working with international law, like I do now with sports law, was super important. And I love that about it, like international dimension. I get to deal with so many different cultures, so many different people. I have players and agents from all over the world as my clients. So the fact that I get to even communicate with them and practice my languages, because I love languages. I love all of that about it. So that's the first answer to your first question. And the second one was that again?
What are the range of things that you're required to do as a sports lawyer?
Yeah. So that's a very good question, because that's something I didn't really know in the beginning. Like, what does a sports lawyer actually do? And basically, I always say my activities are kind of twofold. It's like, on the one hand, it's transactional, so like contractual work. So it's dealing with contracts between players and agents, between clubs and players, between clubs and agents, contractual stuff. So it's revising contracts, drafting contracts, and all of that good stuff. And on the other hand, there's the dispute resolution work, which is basically, and there's a lot of disputes, as you might know, in sports law, resolving disputes between different stakeholders, which are usually, in my case, between clubs and players, or between agents and players. Whenever, let's say a player hasn't gotten their salaries paid, or there's an issue because the player signed an employment or a representation agreement with different agents, even though he promised one of the agents it was going to be an exclusive relationship. So stuff like these, when disputes arise, and there's so many more complex disputes, but yeah, that's basically when we come in and we help them with dispute resolution. So that's usually by going through the FIFA organs, the FIFA judiciary bodies, and then there's the CAS, the Court of Arbitration for Sports, and yeah, that's mostly it.
That's very insightful. So one of my observations, I think, from your answer would be that in order to summarize this, sports law, like the role of a sports lawyer, is to apply different fields of law. For example, how to interpret and enforce contractual obligations in the world of sports, in a sporting environment wherein there is a club and a player, wherein there is an agent and a player. So in perspective of these relationships, you need to apply these different areas of law, contracts, and also the transactional side, and of course, arbitrations and all that. And I completely agree with you that, sports is so fascinating. So whenever we get a chance to interact and apply our skills in that environment, it becomes even more special. So exactly. Yeah, I completely get that.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, because especially in literature, there's a little bit of a discussion going on, or has been going on for years now, as to whether sports law as such is like a standalone substantive area of law, or whether it's kind of like an accumulation of different fields of law. And I think that's kind of what it is. Like, it's a field of law that overlaps with so many other fields of law, like contractual law, criminal law, European law, all these different commercial law, all these different types of laws. You take a little bit of everything, and that's kind of what sports law is, and then you apply it to different subjects, so to say, or in a different context. And of course, there's some stuff that is very specific to sports. Let's say, for example, the FIFA regulations, for example, the regulations on working with minors, that's very specific, of course, to football law. So there is such a thing as specific football law, but in general, I would say it's applying, exactly like you said, applying different fields of law and skills from different areas of law to in a sporting context.
Correct. Now, Jessie, as I mentioned in your introduction while introducing you, that you worked with some of the biggest organizations in the world of football. And I think every football fan, and like even people who are not football fans would know, of FC Barcelona, of organizations such as UEFA, which is the controlling body for European football. So you had the experience of working with these organizations in the strategy and innovation team and department. So my next question is, where did that shift happen wherein you're working with the strategy and innovation department? And can you describe the experience for us? Like, what was it, like working with these powerhouses?
Yeah, of course. I love that question because that's a question that I feel like I always want to shed some light on. And that's also what I said in the beginning about pivoting your directions. So my goal had always kind of been to eventually end up in law, but I also think that for a sports lawyer, it's extremely important to have an understanding of the sports industry, because at the end of the day, that's kind of what sets you apart from other lawyers, is the fact that you may be an expert and you might, memorize the entire legal codes and everything, but you need to understand the sports ecosystem. Who are the different stakeholders? Why is it so fast paced? Like, you cannot just, the way that a normal lawyer would conduct his activities, like, oh, okay, we'll take maybe 48 hours to get back to you, or leave me an email. In the sporting industry, it just doesn't happen like that. Like, I work 7 days a week. I mean, not 7 days, like it depends, but I should be available to my clients 7 days a week. I need to understand that if they say that, oh, they're working with this and this sponsor, who that is, like, you need a lot of knowledge besides legal knowledge in order to succeed, I would say, as a sports lawyer. So for me, coming from the outside and only having a legal background, never having worked in sports, I felt like it was super important for me to really understand how clubs function, what their mission is, how they function internally. So when opportunity came along to work in the strategy and innovation department at FC Barcelona, and I had never heard of innovation. Like, back in the day, I didn't know what that would mean in a club. Like, I was like, okay, innovation, like, it sounds cool, but I didn't know what it was. And I was just like, okay, let's just try it. Because it was FC Barcelona, of course. And I loved it. It was such an amazing experience for me, being a big FC Barcelona fan. Like, I'm sure, as you can imagine, like, just the fact of like walking around in the club, taking sometimes phone calls, walking around like an empty stadium, parking my car, even like where all the football players were parked, like that environment was so motivating to me. And it's exactly what I wanted, the environment that I want to be in. It's exactly what excites me about it. Just, seeing these matches and knowing that somehow you're kind of contributing to the overall bigger picture of that was an amazing experience. And working for the Innovation Hub was super interesting because basically it was kind of like a startup inside a inside like a big powerhouse, because the innovation department was extremely new when I first started working there. I think it was like 9 months old only. So it was like being a little startup inside a very big monster of a company. And so we had to collaborate, let's say, with all the different departments in the club to try and help and improve their activities and find innovative solutions to their needs, to their business needs. So yeah, that's how I got to interact with so many different people from the club. I got to network a lot, and I got to really understand like how the club is structured, the different positions that are out there. And that was super important for me. And also one of the reasons why now I also do mentoring for students that want to get into sports is because I do not only have like the legal knowledge, but I also know, thank God to these experiences, how these big clubs and organizations work from the inside and what different career prospects are there. Because I think that's something that a lot of people don't know, is that they don't actually know, what you can do as a sports lawyer or just being in sports management in general. So that was an amazing experience. And then I ended up working there for 1.5 years. And then the opportunity to come to UEFA in Switzerland came along, and to basically do the same thing as I was doing there. So working with a lot of startups, doing research and innovation, sharing knowledge and our best practices with other stakeholders. So yeah, then I did the same thing at UEFA, which was, I wouldn't say even better, but equally elevating experience, because just being there, and when they at the draw of the Champions League and all these iconic moments was super interesting to me. And also being there when the pandemic had hit, because UEFA, as you can imagine, is a rather like traditional organization, and to have to deal with postponing a Euro Cup that has been in the making for so many years, and everything was planned around it, and having to deal with the sponsors and all these different complications that came from there, was super interesting for me to see. And I learned a lot from that, like how to pivot in those moments and how to be innovative, let's say, and come up with solutions, because there were contracts in place. Everything was planned a certain way. And yeah, so that was really interesting. And then eventually I, because I've always had, and I think working with startups really kind of enforced that feeling of my entrepreneurial spirit, let's say, inside that I had, that I would love to work on something that I could call my own. And so I eventually ended up going back to Barcelona and starting my own sports law firm, which is called Sensato Sports Law. And we specifically focus on sports law. We do not do any, we're not like a multidisciplinary firm. We are a boutique law firm specialized in sports law. And yeah, I run the firm with one other business partner. He's actually from India. And I met him when I was doing my master's degree here in Barcelona. And so far, so good.
It's very nice, Jessie, to interact with someone who has worked with these organizations, which I think, is a dream job for any sports fan or any sports lover, to basically get to know these organizations inside out and know what the structure is like, what are the different things that they work on. Now, you mentioned, Jessie, that in order to excel in the field of sports law and management, and to work with these organizations, it's very important to not only know the legal side, but also know how the business works, how they develop the clubs, from a business perspective as well. So, with the growing relevance of sports and more people, becoming, interested in sports and its legal interactions, what do you think are the main skills that one needs to work on in order to become a sports lawyer? Because many of us want to become sports lawyers, but we do not know what are the skills that we should work on.
Yeah, that's a very, very fair question. So I always say there's like three main ingredients to be a successful sports lawyer or to get into the field. And that's knowledge, experience, and network. Knowledge, obviously, is everything we discussed. Having the legal knowledge, you need to know the rules inside out, the specific football law rules from FIFA, etc. You need to know a little bit about every different area of law that interacts within a sporting context. So obviously, the knowledge part is very important. But besides that, there's very important skills, and that's being able to actually find experience in the field, which is a very difficult part, I think, because a lot of people, they don't know how to find internships. They don't know how to land a job in this field, and it's so competitive and it's so niche. And that's also why I'm quite active on social media and stuff, to really try and guide people a little bit from the inside, let's say, and share some insights on what sports law is, how to find internships and all of that. Like, you need some type of experience. And I would say legal experience, but also experience in a sporting context. Like I said, for me, working at FC Barcelona and UEFA in innovation, that helped me tremendously to now be able to, to deal with my clients and to really understand their needs, because I understand it from a business perspective as well, like you mentioned, and not just from a legal perspective. And I think that they really appreciate that, because, at the end of the day, it's important to have the knowledge part, but if you don't know how to apply it, if you don't know how it works in the real world, if you're just an academic and you've never had that experience, then it's very difficult to be a good lawyer to your clients, I guess. And the last part is networking. Networking in sports is so important. Building a solid network is really tough. And it's not always, pleasant to do, like having to connect with people on or offline, going for coffees, not knowing if one day you're going to be able to help each other out or not. But building a solid network is so important. And that's something also I wish I kind of, knew before. But yeah, I would say those are the main skills that someone would need to work on.
That was very, very insightful, Jessie. And I think I'll agree with the part on networking, there's a notion, there's a narrative that runs around that networking is all about seeking, favor. That's not how it works. It's not about seeking favors. It's not always about getting the internships or the job offers. It's about creating a network wherein you have mutual respect for each other as professionals, and you can at least recommend each other for the right opportunities, so that you can who's there working in what sphere. And I think that's what a good network is all about: respecting each other as professionals and learning something from each other, because there's so much to learn in the field of law. Now, Jesse, we know what skills are required, but another problem is how to acquire these skills. Now, as you mentioned, sports law is not something that law schools focus upon, at least not in India. I'm not, I'm speaking this from my experience, that there are very limited law schools in India which focus or offer a module in sports law. And it's all about, getting out there on your own and learning these skills. So, with that perspective in mind, I think you started a brilliant initiative called the Sports Lawyer Masterclass. Can you tell us more about this masterclass, and what all skills are you looking to, teach in this masterclass?
Yeah, of course. So I'd just like to mention a little bit of background information as to why I actually started the masterclass. And you already briefly touched upon that, but it's basically because I started receiving so many messages on LinkedIn. I would say throughout the years, but especially when I started being more active and posting more content, I would get so many messages on a daily basis and emails of people asking me like, I love sports and law. I want to get into sports and law, but I don't know where to start. Like, yeah, there's some educational programs, but they're either super expensive or they're not in my country, or I've done one of those programs and still I don't know what to do because I only have the knowledge part, but I don't have the soft skills. Like, it's not as easy as becoming, let's say, an accountant or a doctor when the whole path to get there is kind of like deciphered, So I just felt like, okay, I keep getting the same questions. And I started at some point even like copy pasting answers because I would always get the same questions. And then I was thinking like there should be another way that I can share all my insights with people, instead of like, having to write super long emails or having to jump on calls every now and then with students, because I only have limited time. But at the same time, I really wanted to help those people because I have been in their shoes a couple of years ago when I was just discovering sports law, and I wish I had someone that I could ask questions to, or someone that would shed a little bit more of light on what this universe is all about, so to say. So that's when I came up with the idea of creating like a little online course, or a masterclass in this case, that is self-paced, that people can just log into and log off on, where I basically share all these three things that I mentioned before: knowledge, experience, and network. I share the most important regulations, so you gain an in-depth understanding of like a theoretical framework surrounding sports. Obviously, this does not compare to like a 1-year degree master's in sports law. I can only do so much in a short online course, but it gives you the best understanding of what sports law is all about. So you can also make an informed decision as to whether you want to pursue a further degree in that field or not. Then it's about experience, like we said before, how to actually find an experience, how to find a job, or how to find an internship in the field. That's so important to get started with. And I feel like that's where most people get stuck. So I give you all my inside advice and things that I applied myself to land these dream jobs that I landed, and how I would do it now if I were to start over again. So I basically give all my advice on that. Also transferable skills. I think that's super important because, sorry for the noise. A lot of times people ask me like, oh, but I don't have any experience in sports, or I don't have any experience in sports law. Can I still use my skills for something? And transferable skills are so important. Like there's so many skills that you learned in law school, or maybe in other fields of law that you can apply to sports law. Because like we said before, like we established, sports law is kind of like an overlapping area of different areas of law. It's like an intersection point. So you can always kind of build your case by focusing on highlighting those skills. So I teach you kind of how to do that. And then the last part, which is super important also, and that we discussed briefly before, about networking. So I just give you my blueprint, I would say, on how to build solid connections and a network of people that eventually you may rely on or may not be able to rely on. Because like you mentioned, I love that you said that. I think a lot of people have this misconception of networking that like you do me a favor and I do you a favor right away and that's it. But it's really about building more meaningful connections. And I see this happening every day because I get so many emails in my inbox and on LinkedIn of people saying, hey, this is XYZ. I'm interested in sports law. I want to do an internship at your firm. Here's my CV. Please get back to me ASAP. And then they follow up saying, oh, you didn't respond yet. Can I get an internship? And I always try and respond because I understand like the need for it. But at the same time, like that's just not the way to do it. Like there's certain approaches that I think they were not taught in law school. That I wish someone would have taught me back in the day, because even when I go back through my LinkedIn messages now, for example, I see myself sending those type of messages years ago. And now I'm looking back and I'm like, oh my God, obviously that approach was never going to work. And that's even demotivated, because if you feel like you're always messaging people and you don't get response or you don't get the right answers, maybe it's your approach that isn't working. So, to be able to differentiate yourself from others, there are certain tips and tricks that you can implement that could help you stand out from the crowd, basically. So yeah, all of that bundled together, that's what I call the sports law masterclass. And it's very much focused also on the practical aspect of getting into the industry and getting your foot in the door, which I think there's a bit of a lack of guidance in that context. So yeah, and I actually just dropped the price to €79 now from 249 as it was before, really because I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to access this course, and especially people from India, because I know that because of the currency exchange and the financial resources are just different in different parts of the world. And I have so many people, especially from India, that's why I'm happy to be able also to jump on these type of podcasts and webinars, that I feel like there's such a huge interest and such a huge demand for tools like these, but either they're unaffordable or it's not as developed in your continent yet, not as much as it is here in this hub of sports in Europe. So I just wanted to make it accessible for everyone and share my knowledge with as many people as possible. And yeah, that's kind of it.
I think that's a brilliant initiative, Jessie, and I'll definitely also attach the link of the masterclass for people to check it out. And those who are interested, I'll fully encourage them to do so and enroll. And I completely agree, yeah, that Indian students have a lot of interest, law students in sports law, in developing a career in sports law. We are crazy about sports, and we're crazy particularly about sports like football, and we're good at cricket and all these things. So yeah, so I'll definitely encourage people to enroll for that course. Now, Jesse, moving on to the final part of this conversation, we have seen that in the recent times, some very interesting sports law issues have come into light, and they've come into light in the sense that ordinary people, even non-lawyers, are discussing these issues. For example, Djokovic's legal battle over vaccination mandates, right? Or the fact that the F1 title was decided on the last lap, and the decision in itself created a lot of controversy, whether or not the safety car, what amount of cars should have gone into the pit stop, and all these things. And then, of course, the financial control in football transfers and all that. So, as a sports lawyer, Jesse, how do you approach these issues? Could you give us some insights on that? Like, for example, you're a lawyer and you get one of these issues, to work upon. How do you approach these issues?
Yeah. So that's something that I love about sports law, is the fact that it's becoming more and more relevant in daily life, and the fact that there's conversations that are happening, or even now, for example, with the war. This is not about sports law, but just law in general. With the war happening now between Russia and Ukraine, like where international law comes into play, law is so relevant in daily life. And I think a lot of people underestimate that. They think that law is maybe about divorce laws or whatever, but it's so relevant in daily life, and it's so powerful. But yeah, going back to sports law, for me, all those issues are super interesting. And, it really shows that that law is not black and white. And I think that's something that even myself, I've had to come to terms with, that because like I said, I'm a very analytical and like a problem solving mind, I would say. So sometimes I just like to have a yes or no answer, like who's right and who's wrong. But to all these issues that you just mentioned, that I've written on something like a little bit of an analysis of most of these, it's not that black and white. Like you can have your opinion, and then the law says something else maybe. And that's something that I've noticed, especially, for example, with the whole Djokovic vaccine mandate case, is that sometimes I'll be sharing like my legal opinion, and people will be saying like, but how can you think that about it? And I'm like, I'm not saying that's what I think. My opinion is one thing, but then what the law says is another thing, and it's very interesting to see like that intersection of opinions and legal opinions, which are very different. on all these subjects. And yeah, I haven't gotten to work on any of these specific cases myself. But I'm teaching at universities, and for example, the creation of the Super League, I actually created like a whole case study out of that subject for my students, and because so many different legal ramifications came into play in that specific issue, that is super interesting to just analyze it from different fields, and like European law and IP law and all these different things, competition law. They're also relevant, and that's why it's so important for a sports lawyer also to stay up to date with everything that is happening in the world. For example, now something that I'm really looking into is the metaverse, Web3, NFTs. That's going to be super important. That's something that, again, there's not always a code, and there's not always a regulation for everything. Some of these things are just evolving and developing, and it's super important for a sports lawyer to be on top of the latest news and the latest trends, and to kind of be like a front runner, in these type of situations. So I just try to be prepared as possible, to absorb as much knowledge as possible. Of course, it's good to have your opinions and stuff, but at the end of the day, legal opinions, at the end of the day, the judge decides also, and you can either agree with it or not. But it's it's super interesting, and I love that.
Well, I completely agree, Jesse, that law and legal questions and issues in themselves do not have black and white answers. They have so many things with a shade of gray, I believe, and there's a mix of both. So, Jesse, thank you so much for joining us today. And before we conclude this conversation, any last piece of advice to budding sports lawyers and sports law enthusiasts?
Definitely. I actually just published an article on this, and that's personal branding. Personal branding, so standing apart and putting out content on LinkedIn and making use of these tools that we have nowadays that we didn't have maybe 10 years ago is so important. And just starting and staying consistent. There's actually 3 different type of advices, but it's kind of all mixed together. Like, it's little efforts that you need to do every day, like maybe publishing an article or a legal opinion, connecting with someone on LinkedIn. All these little efforts eventually, because of the compound effect, will lead to more effective results. And you may not see it while you're in the process. And that's something that I had to deal with myself, that I felt like, I'm writing so many people, I'm doing all these things, and there's no direct new cases or clients coming out of it, or there's no direct money coming in, or there's no direct whatever coming in from this. But it's the intangible results that also really count, because at the end of the day, you're building something bigger, which is kind of your personal brand, which is going to help you stand out from the crowd. Because like we established before, there's a lot of interest in working in sports and working in sports law, etc. But there's only so many opportunities. So you need to somehow differentiate yourself a bit. And I feel like nowadays with social media, and then with the opportunity to kind of brand yourself, it's a really, really great tool to do that. And just staying consistent with it is super important. Staying up to date with the latest news, and just trying to absorb as much knowledge as you possibly can, like attending these type of webinars, and really kind of going the extra mile and doing things sometimes when you don't even feel like doing it, is super important.
That's very insightful, Jesse, and I completely agree that personal branding is very. People know that I'm a lawyer working in this area, talking about this issue, and these are my opinions, and I would love to engage with your opinion as well. So that's all it's all about, and
Exactly. And that's actually, just to add to that, like, because you can be there, I'm sure that there's like 20,000 lawyers that are smarter than me, or that have more knowledge of the sports law than me, but maybe they're just sitting behind their desks and they're not out there in the open, so that's why maybe I am on this session with you now, and not them. So knowledge and expertise is important, but it's also about sharing that with the world and letting people know that you're there, because otherwise no one is going to find you. So yeah, that's exactly, just remarking what you said before.
Thank you, Jesse. That would be the end of our conversation, and it was an honor to host you, and it was very, very insightful.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Like I said before, I love getting the opportunity to talk a bit more about sports law, and especially for Indian students. And also feel free to reach out to me if you're watching this on LinkedIn, because I love connecting with aspiring sports lawyers and trying to guide you a little bit on this journey.